Right, everyone. Race week is back. It's not just back, it's back and better than ever because you have not one, not two, but three races, 3 weekends in a row. Starting with the race in Suzuka at the Japanese Grand Prix, the most famous circuit, the most admired circuit, the best circuit that I think by consensus Formula One drivers and fans agreed on. And I am very excited. But as we head into this weekend, there are at least three things we should be looking for. Let's get to it. All right, number one, and this is pretty obvious, right? Red Bull gave us the gift of the off weekend in Formula One by doing the driver swap that they're always used to doing a little bit later in the season. This year, they couldn't wait to get to it right away. And look, no matter what you think of it, this is an exciting opportunity for Yuki Tsunoda to get his chance in the Red Bull that he's been waiting for years now. If anyone is ready, he is ready. And if he's not ready now, then he's not ready at all. So it is what it is. But this is an exciting weekend for Yuki because he heads to his home circuit. He's going to have Honda powered fans, family, everybody in there. And I, for one, cannot be more excited to see what he does. So, of course, our number one storyline is Yuki Tsunoda. Now, it is expected, based on his work in the simulator, that Yuki would do fairly well, though it's whoever's guess, because in a tight field at the front of the grid, it is really hard to see how Yuki would kind of put himself in the top five. He's talked about wanting to get a podium, which I completely appreciate and admire, but I think a top 10 finish would probably be really good. And then based on what happens in the front of the grid, it could be that he might sneak up into the top five, maybe even a podium, but that might be a little too much to expect. Nonetheless, I, for one, am hoping that he does well for the very simple reason that I'd hate to see another driver swap happen in a matter of weeks. Helmut Marko did come on and tell us that Yuki will finish out the season. So that, I suppose, is a bit of a relief. But it'd be interesting to see what Yuki does this weekend. He certainly seems to have the confidence. He's got nothing to lose, in my opinion, and that usually makes for a good formula to be successful. So Yuki Tsunoda, of course, is our top storyline headed into this weekend. But I think we should also look at what might happen with Max, because in reality, we still are not sure that Red Bull have kind of figured out what they need to be at the front of the grid. I think they're easily the fourth quickest car. I think that is now not a stretch to say. That's not something that can really be argued. Max has done Max-like things, and he has masked all of their issues. But I think at some point this is sort of going to run out. And in reality, you can kind of trace all of this back to Miami last year and even further before that. But in terms of performance and seeing the end results, we've seen this sort of decline from Red Bull in Miami last year. And I think, and I hate to kind of say this because I'm appreciative of what Max does, but I think it's about to run out really fast unless they figured out a way to solve their problems. Now, Shez and I spoke with Kunal Shah earlier this week, actually last week, and we discussed a lot of what was happening behind the scenes at Red Bull. And that still remains fascinating because one of the things that cannot be denied, rather, is that Red Bull has lost key technical staff. And perhaps you could argue that they have the personnel to make that comeback, but Formula One is a pretty brutal sport. And so the question is, how soon can they get on top of their issues? It doesn't seem likely that in the midst of this season where Mercedes are at the front, McLaren are obviously dominating, and even Ferrari, for all of their issues, seem to have a car that is quicker than Red Bull. If they can put it together, and I know that's a big if, I get it. I know most of you are going to laugh at me saying that, but it is what it is. I mean, it does seem like the max factor at some point is going to run out as well. So I'd be keen to know if that car, if the RB21 can actually kind of make it to the top step of the podium or even on the podium itself. It doesn't seem likely, but I think that'll be telling a lot, because if Max cannot drive this car and make it go faster than he's already doing, then I don't know what will. All right, the second storyline obviously is, will McLaren have a challenger? They won 2 races. You could argue, gave up a sprint win by being a little bit creative in sprint qualifying in China, but in reality, they've been dominant. The question really is, will Mercedes or Ferrari be able to challenge them this weekend? I think Mercedes are quite interesting. We've not really talked about them a whole lot. My friends, George Russell fans in particular, have been on me for making me seem like a George Russell hater. I'm not. I admire him. I just think that the Mercedes is just a little bit of a step below McLaren. And my guess is they are looking forward to 26 already. So in my opinion, I think they're trying to do the best they can for 25. They're trying to make the car simpler for both drivers to drive, and you can kind of see the results because let's admit it, George Russell has been nothing but outstanding the this last two races plus the sprint race. I think you can make a good argument for him being one of the top three drivers, maybe perhaps arguably even the best driver for this part of the season. Just two races, guys. So hold your horses, and it's just two races really. But George has done a great job, and again, I think they're positioned to kind of pick up the pieces in case something happens up front with the McLaren drivers or Ferrari do what Ferrari have done. And really, Red Bull doesn't seem to be in the game right now to challenge McLaren. So I'd assume that Mercedes will continue to be right on the heels of McLaren and then be ready for whatever's there. And kudos to George. And by the way, shout out to Kimi Antonelli. I mean, he has done a massive job as a rookie to kind of put his car where he's at the last couple of weekends. We've not seen much of him in the TV broadcast, but he has done a fantastic job. And I think that he is every bit, or has shown to be every bit the driver that Toto hoped that he would be. And maybe he's the next Max. Who knows? That's a little bit too soon to say. But both Mercedes drivers have done a good job. The big question is, what about my guys at Ferrari? And let's be honest, I have no idea. I have no idea what they're going to do. Like I've still not recovered from the massive skid wear and the underweight disqualification that was in China. And the only thing I can say is it seems like Ferrari have built a car, and to their credit, they had talked about changing the car drastically, which I guess some of us did not buy at the beginning of the season. So they're in a bit of a learn and see mode. My hope really for them is to just be thereabouts. If they can win, that's fantastic. But I'd like for them to have a mistake-free weekend, and I think they will. I think they Fred Vasseur has done a really good job of bouncing back from issues from previous weekends, and even if you go back to last year. In Spain, they kind of lost their way. And then Fred did bring them back towards the end of the season to the point where they were competing for a Constructors' Championship and fell short by only a few points. So I would like to believe that Fred will bring the team back on track, and I'm not really expecting them to be challenging for the win this particular weekend. But I think that you can sort of trust that they will be in the mix for the top 5 positions. And then, of course, there is talk about Ferrari bringing a new floor either to Bahrain, which is the second race after Japan, or maybe even Japan. I've read stories either way, so I'm not 100% certain whether the floor is actually coming to Japan or will it come in Bahrain. But maybe by the time I post this, we might have confirmation on exactly what's going to happen. But I'd like to believe, especially in seeing what Lewis Hamilton did on the sprint weekend, that he certainly has the upper hand, in my opinion, at this point. And I know this is going to blow Shez's mind when I say that, but it is true. And I think that if they figure out this car to work according to Lewis, I think the season bodes well. They obviously cannot afford to have any mistakes, even though there's just been 2 races and there are 22 more to go. It already feels like the kind of weekend that they have to make count in some decent way. So a clean weekend is all we can hope for Ferrari. But I think in reality, both Mercedes and Ferrari, even at their best, are still probably a step behind McLaren. So I'm not really sure that McLaren can be challenged just yet. But the big thing is that the new technical directive, which is sort of a clarification, really comes into Spain. And that is about 6 more races away from us now at this point. So it does feel like the time when McLaren will kind of make hay while the sun shines. And then we see if that technical directive on that flexi wing will actually impact their performance or not. It sort of remains to be seen. But the consensus, the talk around the paddock is that McLaren is benefiting from that, and perhaps Mercedes too, to a certain extent. So it'll be interesting to see how McLaren go this weekend and really approach these next 6 races until that directive comes into play. Now, speaking of McLaren, I think that they are the storyline of the season thus far. And I don't know, for whatever reason, It is not exciting to talk about Lando and Oscar in the same way as it is to talk about Lewis and Max. And I know I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek here. Of course, Lewis Hamilton is amongst the GOATs. Of course, Max Verstappen is amongst the GOATs. But the McLaren drivers are putting on a bit of a clinic right now at this point. The two races, plus even the sprint race, which you could argue McLaren did a pretty poor job in kind of setting their car up. They probably took a chance they shouldn't have. The reality is that the McLaren drivers have done a good job. Both drivers have won a race, so I'm interested to see who's going to come out on top in Japan. And really for these next couple more races thereafter too, it could be the sort of the turning point if one or the other kind of manages to rack up some wins, and if the other one has some misfortunes. Who knows what that looks like? There might be Papaya rules coming into play really, really quickly. But in reality, McLaren have put up two boring weekends, really, because it has not been fun to watch them up front, because they've done such a great job, and all kudos to them. Look, there's a lot of debate about who's better, Lando, Oscar. I think the reality is that they're really, really close. And depending on where you sort of see your fealty or loyalty, you might skew one way or another. I think it's fair to say that Oscar has had the upper hand in China, and maybe even to a certain extent in Australia. Of course, he had that bad luck in Australia with catching rain at just the worst time, with Max behind him, not being able to bring the car back in time, but still managed to salvage some points. So kudos to him. He could, you argue, could have been ahead of Lando in the standings. Right now finds himself about 10 points down to Lando. But in my opinion, I think Lando also is right there. He's been in a championship battle last year, and I don't think that those lessons can sort of go to waste for no reason. And I'd like to believe that both drivers on their day can win really well. And they both had clean weekends when they've sort of started from the front, been able to dominate wire to wire and win. And Lando did a really good job in the rain, by the way, in Australia, that we kind of forget in some ways with the two restarts and whatnot. And on the other hand, Oscar put up a clinic in Shanghai. So I think to an extent, you can just simply say it is what it is, and we'll see where the two driver pairings fall out. And I think it's really, really close between the two. I would really like to see, and I know Shez would like to see both the drivers actually compete. And it feels like McLaren have been holding them back a little. They are trying to play it conservative to an extent. I think they've made that known. I think, again, with the technical directive coming up in Spain, there's probably a little bit of fear about what that really means in terms of results moving forward. So my guess is we're not going to see a whole lot of wheel to wheel, because I think it probably is the wiser decision for McLaren to make, especially if they're going to find either a Ferrari or maybe in a Mercedes or maybe even Red Bull kind of mount a challenge for the constructors towards the middle part of the year and towards the end of the year. So who knows? But I think it's fascinating. I'd love to see both drivers challenge. And I think the one thing that I maintain is, look, we've seen what Lando has done when he was challenging Max last year. This year is going to be different for both these drivers. If they're going to get competition from someone from behind them, whether it's Max or Lewis or Charles or George even, it's going to be interesting to see how they do in battle. We haven't really seen a whole lot. We've seen a little bit of what they do here and there, and Lando's fared really poorly compared to Max, but that was last year. And Oscar was, I think, in one really good heated battle with Charles in Baku, which many DRS guys. But look, he did a great job there. All kudos and credit to him there. The reality is, over the course of the season, what happens when they're being challenged, either of them challenging each other or being challenged by other drivers. So that remains to be a fascinating story. So I'm going to be interested to see what happens in qualifying in Suzuka, and I think that'll kind of set the tone for the weekend for the drivers. But I think at the moment it's difficult to pick against either of the McLaren drivers, and I don't think you can go really wrong if you pick either one of them. And in fact, I would fully expect a 1-2 McLaren in Suzuka, because it is kind of the circuit that would benefit them as well. But that's it for me. Shez and I will be back with lots. We usually do a post-quali video and then a post-race video. And then in the meantime, do let us know, what do you think are the major storylines for Suzuka? What are you hoping to see? Are you hoping to see Yuki on the podium? Are you looking forward to George winning his first race of the season? Seems very deserving. Are Ferrari going to bounce back and surprise us all? Or will it just be the McLaren boys doing their thing up front and making the races, dare I say, slightly boring? Please like, please subscribe, please comment. Please share this with others. We are really excited to be able to do some great work with some really good guests, and we're hoping to bring on a few more as the season passes. So thanks for your support. Thanks for the comments. We read each and every one of them. We try to respond to as many as we possibly can. Shez and I will see you in the next one. Later.